The station called Orion Gate 9 hung in the darkness between three star systems like a piece of quiet diplomacy carved into the void. It had been built centuries ago by the founding members of the Galactic Concord, a coalition of 32 species that believed civilization could exist without endless war. The station was enormous, 3 rotating habitation rings wrapped around a central diplomatic core, glowing softly with thousands of lights. For most species in the galaxy, Orion Gate 9 was a symbol of stability. For humans, it was the place where everything was about to change. Inside the main council chamber, the air carried a faint metallic scent from the station's life support systems. A circular table stretched across the center of the room, large enough to seat representatives from every known civilization. Each chair was designed differently. Some were pools of nutrient fluid for aquatic species. Others were tall skeletal frames for creatures that preferred to hang rather than sit. Several were armored platforms built to withstand the weight of species whose bodies could crush steel. But one seat stood out. A simple human chair. It had been placed there only 3 weeks earlier. And nearly every delegate in the room had already decided it didn't belong. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as the final representatives entered. Ambassador Lethrix of the Varn Dominion arrived first, his tall reptilian body gliding across the polished floor with quiet confidence. His species had ruled half their quadrant long before humanity discovered radio waves. Behind him came the Karathi Collective, represented by 3 identical insectoid drones that moved with unsettling synchronization. Then the Selenari Union, a species of pale, luminous beings whose bodies looked almost like living starlight. One by one, the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy took their seats. And almost every eye in the chamber eventually drifted toward the same empty chair. The human seat. A low murmur moved through the chamber. Most species had only learned of humanity recently. A young civilization from the Orion Arm. Technologically promising. Politically unpredictable. And, according to several early reports, dangerously persistent. The doors to the chamber opened. The murmuring stopped. A single human walked inside. She wasn't tall compared to some of the towering alien diplomats, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made the room feel smaller. Her name was Ambassador Elena Voss. She wore a dark diplomatic uniform marked with the blue insignia of the United Earth Directorate, and in her hand she carried a thin data slate containing humanity's official petition. The request was simple. Humanity wanted a seat in the Galactic Concord. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched long enough that it became obvious it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Ambassador Voss walked calmly to the human chair and sat down. Only then did the presiding officer activate the chamber's translation field. A voice echoed across the room. Session 4211 of the Galactic Concord is now in order. The presiding officer was Magister Othrel, an ancient being from a species so old that most of the galaxy barely remembered where they had originated. His voice was slow, calm, and completely neutral. The matter before the Council today concerns the admission of the species known as humanity. A faint ripple of discomfort moved around the chamber. Several delegates shifted in their seats. Others simply stared at the human ambassador with thinly veiled curiosity. Magister Othrel continued. Ambassador Elena Voss, you may present your species petition. Voss stood. She glanced briefly around the room, taking in the dozens of alien faces watching her. Some looked curious. Some looked irritated. A few looked openly hostile. She had expected that. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment. First contact with the wider galaxy had been complicated. Many species had welcomed trade and communication. Others had been less enthusiastic. Human history, after all, was filled with wars, revolutions, and rapid technological leaps that many older civilizations considered reckless. But humanity had something the Concord could not ignore. Determination. Voss placed her data slate on the table and activated it. A holographic projection appeared above the council chamber. Earth. Blue oceans. Green continents. A fragile world spinning quietly around a yellow star. Honored delegates, Voss began, her voice steady. Humanity comes before this council not as conquerors, and not as rivals. She paused for just a moment. But as participants in the shared future of this galaxy. The hologram shifted. Human cities appeared. Orbital stations. Research vessels moving between distant colonies. In less than 2 centuries, humanity has expanded beyond our home system and established peaceful contact with 17 neighboring civilizations. Another shift in the projection. Trade routes. Scientific exchanges. Joint exploration missions. We believe cooperation is the foundation of progress, Voss said. And we believe the Galactic Concord represents the greatest example of that principle in known space. A faint murmur moved through the council. Some delegates seemed intrigued. Others looked skeptical. Ambassador Lethrix of the Varn Dominion leaned forward slightly, his reptilian eyes narrowing. Voss continued. Humanity seeks membership not for power, but for partnership. The hologram faded. She looked directly at the council. We ask only for the chance to stand beside you. For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then Ambassador Lethrix spoke. His voice carried the faint hiss of reptilian vocal cords. An admirable speech, Ambassador. But there was no warmth in his tone. However, the Concord was not built for species still learning how to control their own aggression. Several delegates shifted in quiet agreement. Lethrix continued. Human history is volatile. Wars. Political upheaval. Technological risks taken without consensus. He tilted his head slightly. Tell us, Ambassador Voss. His eyes locked onto hers. What assurance can humanity provide that your species will not bring that same instability into our alliance? The question hung in the air. And for the first time since entering the chamber, the atmosphere felt slightly less diplomatic. Ambassador Voss did not sit down. She looked calmly at Lethrix. Then she gave a small, almost amused smile. Ambassador, she said, if history has taught humanity anything. Her voice remained perfectly steady. It's that stability isn't created by avoiding conflict. She paused. It's created by learning from it. The chamber fell silent again. And somewhere deep in the council station's diplomatic records, a quiet note was made. Humanity had just spoken. But the galaxy had not yet decided how it would respond. For several seconds after Ambassador Elena Voss finished speaking, the council chamber remained silent. Not the respectful silence of diplomacy. The heavy silence of judgment. Across the circular chamber, alien delegates exchanged subtle signals with their aides and secondary representatives. In the Galactic Concord, nothing was ever decided in a single speech. Every word was measured. Every reaction calculated. Magister Othrel's voice finally broke the quiet. The Council will now respond. Ambassador Lethrix of the Varn Dominion rose slowly from his seat. His tall reptilian frame unfolded with deliberate grace, polished scales reflecting the chamber lights. For centuries, the Varn had been one of the most powerful political forces in the Concord. And Lethrix knew it. He turned his cold, slit-pupiled gaze toward Ambassador Voss. Humanity, he began slowly, is undeniably impressive for a young species. The translation field carried his words smoothly through the chamber. Your expansion has been fast. Your technology evolves quickly. And your persistence is well documented. Several delegates gave faint nods. But Lethrix continued before the atmosphere could soften. However, the word landed like a blade. The Concord does not accept members based on potential. His long clawed fingers rested on the council table. We accept members based on stability. A low murmur moved across the chamber. The Karathi drones clicked softly among themselves. The Selenari representatives dimmed their luminous bodies slightly, an indication of concern. Lethrix tilted his head. Your species has existed in space for less than 3 centuries. During that time you have fought multiple planetary wars, dismantled your own governments more than once, and nearly destroyed your home world with nuclear weapons. He paused deliberately. Your record is not reassuring. Ambassador Voss did not react. She simply stood with her hands resting lightly on the council table. Lethrix slowly began pacing. In contrast, the Concord represents civilizations that have maintained galactic stability for millennia. His voice sharpened. The last thing this alliance requires is another unpredictable power introducing chaos. A few delegates signaled quiet agreement. Others remained silent. Magister Othrel observed everything without visible emotion. Ambassador Voss finally spoke. With respect, Ambassador Lethrix. Her voice remained calm. Every civilization here had a violent past. The chamber lights reflected off dozens of alien eyes. No species arrives at peace without first surviving conflict. For a moment, Lethrix said nothing. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. It was a dry, reptilian sound. "You misunderstand the situation, Ambassador." His voice lost what little politeness it had contained. "We are not discussing whether humanity deserves sympathy. We are deciding whether humanity deserves trust." The word echoed across the chamber. And suddenly the atmosphere felt different. Less diplomatic. More hostile. Magister Othrel slowly turned toward the rest of the council. "The floor is open for vote statements." One by one, several species activated their speaking platforms. The Talarian Syndicate spoke first. "Humanity expands too quickly." The Karathi Collective followed. "Biological aggression levels exceed acceptable thresholds." The Dravani Hegemony added quietly. "Human military simulations show unusually high risk tolerance." Each statement was calm, measured, but the pattern was obvious. One by one, species were declaring humanity too dangerous to admit into the Concord. Ambassador Voss listened to every word. She didn't interrupt, didn't protest, didn't raise her voice. But the tension in the chamber kept growing. Then something unusual happened. A soft voice echoed from the far side of the chamber. The Lyra Coalition representative spoke. Unlike many species present, the Lyrans were physically small, avian beings with silver feathers and bright, intelligent eyes. Humanity has also demonstrated remarkable cooperation. Several heads turned. The Lyra Diplomat continued. "They have negotiated peaceful trade agreements with species many of us failed to communicate with for decades." A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. "They share scientific research freely. They have opened medical technology to multiple worlds." The Lyran paused. And perhaps most importantly, she looked directly at Ambassador Voss. "They are willing to stand here alone." The room grew quiet again. Even Lethrix seemed momentarily annoyed. But he recovered quickly. "Bravery does not equal stability," he said sharply. Magister Othrel raised one ancient hand. "The council will now proceed to a formal vote." Across the chamber, dozens of consoles lit up. Species prepared to cast their decisions. Green lights meant acceptance. Red lights meant rejection. Ambassador Voss slowly sat down. For the first time since entering the chamber, she seemed slightly tired. But not afraid. The council timer began counting down. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Across the room, delegates began pressing their vote keys. 7. 6. 5. On the central display, colored lights started appearing. Red, red, red. A few greens. But far fewer. 3 seconds. 2. 1. The final result appeared above the chamber. Humanity's petition had failed. A low ripple of sound moved through the chamber. Some species seemed relieved. Others looked uneasy. Magister Othrel spoke again. "The motion to admit humanity into the Galactic Concord has been denied." Ambassador Voss slowly stood. She looked around the chamber one last time. There was disappointment in her eyes. But also something else. Understanding. "I see," she said quietly. She reached down and deactivated her data slate. "Then humanity thanks the Council for its consideration." Her voice remained perfectly controlled. "But I hope one day you will reconsider the value of cooperation." Lethrix gave a thin smile. "I suspect we will manage just fine without human participation." Ambassador Voss turned toward the exit. The massive chamber doors began sliding open. And for a moment, it seemed like the story would simply end there. A diplomatic failure. Nothing more. Then a sharp electronic tone cut through the chamber. Security systems activated. Several automated defense turrets descended from the ceiling. The sudden movement startled half the council. Magister Othrel turned sharply. "Explain this." But Ambassador Lethrix already knew. His thin smile widened. Ambassador Voss froze in the center of the chamber. She slowly turned back toward the council. Her voice was calm, but now there was unmistakable tension beneath it. "Ambassador Lethrix," she said quietly, "what exactly is happening?" The reptilian diplomat stepped forward. "Merely a precaution." His eyes gleamed. "Your species represents an unacceptable risk." Several delegates suddenly looked alarmed. "What are you doing?" the Lyran representative demanded. Lethrix ignored her. He raised one clawed hand. The automated turrets locked onto the human ambassador. Every targeting laser settled directly on Elena Voss. The room fell into stunned silence. Voss looked at the weapons, then back at the council. "You're making a mistake," she said. Lethrix's voice was cold. "No." His hand lowered. "We're preventing one." The turrets fired. The sound lasted less than half a second. A burst of brilliant plasma tore through the center of the chamber, and Ambassador Elena Voss collapsed to the floor. Smoke rose slowly into the silent air. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The human ambassador lay motionless on the polished floor of the Galactic Concorde. And somewhere far away, on a small blue planet orbiting a quiet yellow star, humanity had no idea that the galaxy had just declared war. For several seconds after the plasma turrets fired, the council chamber remained completely silent. The smell of burned metal and ionized air slowly spread through the room. Ambassador Elena Voss lay motionless on the polished floor, the blue insignia of the United Earth Directorate darkened by the blast. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the automated defense turrets remained extended from the ceiling, their targeting lights still glowing faintly red. Magister Othrel was the first to react. The ancient presiding officer slowly rose from his elevated platform, his long form shifting with controlled precision. "What have you done?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but every delegate in the chamber heard the anger beneath it. Ambassador Lethrix of the Varn Dominion did not look concerned. He calmly adjusted the diplomatic sash across his scaled shoulder. "A necessary action," he replied. Several representatives stared at him in disbelief. The Lyran delegate's silver feathers bristled in alarm. "You executed a diplomatic envoy," she said sharply, "inside a Concorde chamber." Her voice trembled with disbelief. "That violates every interstellar law we have." Lethrix's expression remained cold. "Only if the species in question is recognized by the Concorde." He gestured casually toward the human ambassador's body. "Humanity is not." A ripple of horrified whispers spread across the chamber. The Karathi drones began clicking rapidly among themselves. The Selenari representative dimmed to a pale blue, an unmistakable sign of distress. Magister Othrel's voice hardened. "You had no authority to deploy security weapons in this chamber." Lethrix finally turned toward the presiding officer. "For centuries the Concorde has survived because we remove threats before they grow too powerful." His eyes moved slowly around the room. Humanity's expansion rate is unprecedented. They colonize aggressively. They innovate recklessly. And their military simulations show unacceptable unpredictability. He spread his hands slightly. The galaxy cannot afford another destabilizing power. The Lyran representative slammed one wing against the council table. This was murder. Several other species began speaking at once. Arguments erupted across the chamber. Legal protocols. Diplomatic violations. Emergency review councils. The room filled with rising chaos. But none of them noticed the quiet figure standing near the chamber wall. He had remained silent through the entire meeting. A junior systems technician. Human. His name was Daniel Reeves. Officially, Reeves was only there to maintain the ambassador's translation equipment and holographic projection systems. He had spent most of the meeting behind a maintenance console, barely visible to the main chamber. But he had seen everything. And right now, his hands were shaking. Reeves stared at the floor where Ambassador Voss lay. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. The galaxy's most powerful diplomatic council had just executed a human ambassador. Without warning, without trial, without even a formal declaration. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Then training took over. Ambassador Voss had insisted on one thing before the mission began. Always record everything. Reeves looked down at the small data device hidden inside his equipment case. The entire meeting had been captured. Every word. Every vote. And the moment the plasma turrets fired. Proof. If he could get it back to Earth. The shouting across the chamber grew louder. Delegates were demanding explanations. Security officers were rushing into the room. But their attention was focused on the political disaster unfolding at the center of the chamber. No one was looking at the technician near the wall. Reeves slowly stepped backward. One step. Then another. His heart pounded so hard he thought the entire room could hear it. A pair of security drones floated past him toward the council floor. Still no one noticed him. Good. He reached the side corridor door. The moment it slid open, he slipped through. The hallway outside the chamber was empty. Bright white lighting stretched down a long circular corridor that wrapped around the station's diplomatic core. Reeves exhaled sharply. Then he ran. His boots pounded against the metal floor as he sprinted toward the nearest transit lift. Behind him, alarms were beginning to sound. Not emergency alarms. Containment protocols. The Concorde would lock down the station once the legal implications of the assassination became clear. And if that happened before Reeves escaped, the evidence would never leave this station. The lift doors opened just as he reached them. He jumped inside and slammed the control panel. Docking ring 7. The lift accelerated downward. Reeves leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. His mind raced. Ambassador Voss had been more than a diplomat. She had been one of the architects of humanity's first contact program. If Earth learned what had happened, everything would change. The lift doors opened again. Docking ring 7 spread out before him, a massive circular bay filled with starships from dozens of species. Cargo freighters, diplomatic transports, exploration vessels. But Reeves only cared about one ship. A sleek human diplomatic courier parked near the far end of the bay. The UES Horizon Dawn. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't even heavily armed. But it was fast. Very fast. Reeves ran across the docking floor. Halfway to the ship, a voice echoed through the bay. Human technician. Stop. Reeves froze. Two Varn security officers stepped out from behind a cargo transport. Tall. Heavily armored. Their plasma rifles were already raised. One of them tilted his head slightly. You were present in the council chamber. Reeves felt cold sweat forming on his neck. Yes, he said carefully. You will come with us. Reeves looked at the rifles. Then at the Horizon Dawn behind them. Then back at the officers. If they searched him, they would find the recording device, which meant the truth would disappear forever. He took a slow breath. Then he did the only thing he could. He ran. The Varn officers shouted. Plasma bolts slammed into the deck behind him as he sprinted toward the ship. The docking ramp of the Horizon Dawn was still open. Reeves leaped up the ramp and dove into the cockpit. Computer, emergency launch. The ship's engines roared to life. Outside the cockpit window, Varn security forces were already rushing across the docking bay. Too late. The Horizon Dawn blasted away from the docking ring, engines burning bright as it shot out into open space. Reeves gripped the control console, breathing hard. Behind him, Orion Gate 9 shrank rapidly in the distance. For a long moment, he simply stared at the stars. Then he activated the ship's long-range communication system. A message appeared on the console screen. Destination, Earth. Reeves inserted the data device into the transmitter port. The recording began uploading. Every second of the council meeting. Every word spoken. Every frame of the ambassador's execution. He swallowed slowly. Earth Command, he whispered. You need to see this. The transmission beam shot across the darkness toward humanity's home system. And with it traveled the truth. A truth that would soon reach a small blue world. where billions of humans were about to learn exactly what the galaxy had done. The transmission from the UES Horizon Dawn reached Earth 6 hours later. It arrived quietly. No alarms. No dramatic warning. Just a routine diplomatic signal entering the communications grid of the United Earth Directorate. At first, the message was handled by a standard monitoring station orbiting above the Pacific Ocean. The operator on duty was a young communications officer named Maya Hernandez. Her shift had been uneventful. Trade confirmations. Navigation updates. Routine diplomatic reports from distant colonies. Then the Horizon Dawn signal appeared. Priority code. Emergency diplomatic transmission. Hernandez frowned slightly and opened the message. The first thing she saw was the recording timestamp. Orion Gate 9, Council Chamber. Her eyes widened. That was where Ambassador Elena Voss had gone. The file continued loading. Hernandez expected a routine meeting report. Instead, the video began playing. The holographic projection from the council chamber filled her workstation screen. Alien diplomats. The circular chamber. Ambassador Voss standing calmly at the center of the room. Hernandez leaned forward, curious. She watched the speech, the debate, the vote. Her confusion slowly turned to concern. Then the security turrets descended from the ceiling. Hernandez stopped breathing. What? The recording continued. The targeting lasers locked onto Ambassador Voss. The human ambassador looked directly at the council. You're making a mistake. The plasma turrets fired. The screen flashed white. When the image returned, Ambassador Elena Voss was lying on the floor of the council chamber. Dead. Hernandez stared at the screen in shock. Her brain refused to process what she had just seen. Then the system alert chimed. Recording complete. Attached message received. A short audio transmission from Daniel Reeves. His voice sounded shaky. Earth Command, you need to see this. Hernandez's hands began trembling. Protocol required that any diplomatic emergency be forwarded to the Directorate Council immediately. But this wasn't just a diplomatic emergency. This was... She swallowed hard. War. Her fingers moved quickly across the console. The file was forwarded. Priority code. Omega-level diplomatic crisis. Within minutes, the recording was traveling across Earth's secure communication network. First to the Directorate Council. Then to Military Command. Then to every major government on the planet. For the first hour, the response was confusion. Surely the recording had been altered. Maybe the Concord security systems malfunctioned. Maybe the Varn had acted independently. Maybe. But the evidence was undeniable. Multiple angles. Clear audio. The entire council session captured without interruption. Humanity's ambassador had been executed. Inside the most important diplomatic chamber in the galaxy. Without trial. Without warning. Without even a declaration of hostility. 3 hours after the transmission arrived, the United Earth Directorate Council convened an emergency session in Geneva. The chamber was full. Political leaders. Military commanders. Scientific advisors. Every major nation on Earth was represented. The recording played again. No one spoke while it ran. When it ended, the room remained silent. The silence lasted almost a full minute. Finally, President Adrian Keller leaned forward in his chair. His face looked older than it had that morning. Is there any doubt about the authenticity of this recording? A data analyst answered quietly. None, sir. The president nodded slowly. What about the technician who sent it? Daniel Reeves is alive. His ship entered jump space immediately after transmitting. Destination: Earth. The room fell quiet again. Admiral Naomi Sato, commander of the United Earth Fleet, folded her hands on the table. The Concorde executed our ambassador. Her voice was calm. Almost too calm. The representative from the European coalition spoke next. That is an act of war. Another voice interrupted. We don't know that the entire council approved it. But they didn't stop it. Arguments began spreading across the room. Diplomats demanded investigation. Military officials demanded retaliation. Political leaders warned against escalation. President Keller raised one hand. The chamber went silent. He turned toward Admiral Sato. "If we respond militarily, what are our chances?" Sato didn't answer immediately. Instead, she activated a holographic display above the table. The projection showed a map of known galactic territory. Human space was a small cluster of stars near the Orion Arm. The galactic concord covered nearly half the chart. "We are outnumbered," Sato said, "by a significant margin." She expanded the display. Fleet strength estimates appeared. Human fleet, 118 combat vessels. Concord member fleets combined, over 2,000 warships. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Sato continued, "But that assumes they fight together." She highlighted several species. The Concord is not a unified empire. It's a political alliance. More icons appeared on the map. Different technologies. Different command structures. Different military doctrines. She paused. And different priorities. The president studied the display. "You're saying they won't cooperate effectively." "I'm saying they won't expect us to fight back." That statement hung in the air. Across the chamber, the Japanese delegate spoke softly. Ambassador Voss believed cooperation was possible. Another voice replied bitterly. They burned her alive in front of the entire council. No one argued with that. President Keller slowly stood. He looked around the room. "We spent 30 years trying to join the Galactic Concord." His voice carried across the chamber. "We opened our technology. We shared our research. We sent them our best diplomat." He paused. "And they murdered her." The room was perfectly silent now. Keller's next words were very quiet. "So the question isn't whether humanity should respond." He looked at Admiral Sato. "The question is how." Sato nodded once. Then she said something that would later be repeated across human history. "First," she said calmly, "we stop talking." The president looked at her. "What do you mean?" Sato deactivated the holographic map. Every diplomatic channel. Every trade negotiation. Every communication with the Concord. She met the president's eyes. "We shut it all down." The representative from the Martian assembly frowned. "That would isolate us completely." Sato shook her head. "No." Her voice was cold. "It will make them nervous." President Keller thought for a long moment. Then he turned toward the Council's communications director. "Transmit a message to every human colony and fleet command." "What message, sir?" The president spoke slowly. "Effective immediately." He paused. "Humanity is entering strategic silence." Across Earth's communication networks, a single directive spread outward toward every human world. No explanations. No speeches. No threats. Just a single instruction. All diplomatic channels with the Galactic Concord are terminated. And for the first time since humanity discovered alien life, the galaxy heard nothing from Earth. No protests. No demands. No retaliation. Just silence. Deep, total, unsettling silence. And across the stars, the civilizations of the Galactic Concord slowly began to realize something terrifying. Humanity had stopped talking. For 3 days after the transmission from Orion Gate 9, the galaxy heard nothing from Earth. No protests. No diplomatic demands. No military threats. Just silence. At first, the Galactic Concord interpreted the quiet as confusion. Several council members believed humanity simply needed time to process what had happened. Others assumed Earth would eventually submit a formal complaint through the Concord's legal system. But the message never came. Instead, something far more unsettling began to occur. Across human-controlled space, activity exploded. It started on Mars. The massive shipyards orbiting the Red Planet had spent decades constructing exploration vessels and cargo transports for expanding human colonies. Now, overnight, their production orders changed. Exploration hulls were cancelled. Trade freighters halted mid-construction. Entire manufacturing lines shut down. Then restarted. But this time they weren't building civilian ships. They were building warships. Thousands of automated drones flooded the shipyard structures, welding armor plating onto skeletal frames that had never been designed for combat. Weapon mounts replaced research laboratories. Reactor cores were upgraded. Shield generators were installed where cargo holds once existed. In less than 48 hours, the Martian shipyards had converted from peaceful industrial centers into full military production facilities. And Mars wasn't the only place changing. On Luna, Earth's orbital defense platforms activated systems that had not been used in over a century. Gigantic railgun batteries rotated slowly into firing positions. Orbital satellite networks shifted from communication arrays to tactical sensor grids. Entire constellations of defense satellites began running continuous combat simulations. On Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, chemical processing plants that normally produced fuel for civilian transport began refining high-density propellant for warship engines. Cargo vessels arriving at the moon's docks found their deliveries redirected to military stockpiles. Everywhere across human space, the same transformation was happening. Factories stopped producing consumer goods. Instead, they built armor plating, weapon systems, starship components. Civilian transport ships were requisitioned by the United Earth Fleet and converted into supply carriers. Even universities joined the effort. Physics departments ran weapon efficiency models. Engineering students helped design new propulsion systems. Artificial intelligence networks simulated thousands of potential fleet engagements. And through all of it, Earth remained silent. No speeches. No declarations. No broadcast messages. The only information leaving human space were routine trade signals and automated navigation updates. But those signals carried no explanation for the sudden industrial surge. Inside the command center of the United Earth Fleet, Admiral Naomi Sato stood before a massive holographic display showing every known human shipyard. Red icons marked military production facilities. The number was growing rapidly. A fleet officer approached her. "Admiral, latest production report." She glanced at the tablet he handed her, then nodded once. "Faster than expected." The officer looked surprised. "Admiral, these numbers are already triple our pre-crisis output." Sato folded her arms. "That's not the surprising part." She pointed toward the holographic map. "Look closer." The officer zoomed in on the data, and suddenly realized what she meant. None of the shipyards were building the same type of vessel. Different hull designs, different weapon layouts, different engine configurations. The officer frowned. "Why so many variations?" Sato answered calmly. "Because the Concorde studies patterns." She walked slowly around the command table. Most species in the galaxy build standardized fleets. One class of destroyer, one class of cruiser, one class of carrier. Her voice remained steady. They optimize for efficiency. The officer nodded. "That's logical." Sato gave a small smile. "Exactly." She tapped the holographic display. Human shipyards were constructing dozens of different warship designs simultaneously. Fast attack craft, heavy artillery vessels, electronic warfare ships, experimental stealth platforms. "Logic makes your enemy predictable," Sato said. She looked directly at the officer. "Human history has taught us something different." The officer waited. Sato finished the sentence. "Unpredictability wins wars." Across the room, another analyst spoke up. "Admiral, long-range sensors show increased Concorde fleet movement near our border systems." Sato nodded slightly. "They're watching." Another officer asked quietly. "Do they know what we're doing?" Sato glanced at the production numbers again. "Not yet." She paused. "But they will." Far away from Earth, inside the diplomatic halls of Orion Gate 9, the leaders of the Galactic Concorde had begun receiving intelligence reports. Human industrial activity had increased by 400%. Shipyards were working continuously. Military ship construction had multiplied overnight. And the most troubling detail of all, human communication channels remained silent. In the council chamber, Ambassador Lethrix studied the data reports with growing irritation. "This is exactly why humanity was denied membership," he said coldly. "They react to conflict with reckless escalation." Several delegates exchanged uneasy looks. The Lyran representative spoke cautiously. "Or they are preparing to defend themselves." Lethrix dismissed the idea with a flick of his claw. "They cannot challenge the Concord militarily." He gestured toward the fleet strength charts. "Their entire navy is insignificant compared to ours." Magister Othrel remained silent. He had watched civilizations rise and fall for thousands of years. And something about the human response troubled him. Not the shipbuilding, not the military expansion, but the silence. Civilizations that planned revenge usually announced it. They threatened. They warned. They declared their anger openly. Humanity had done none of those things. They had simply stopped talking and started building. Back in the United Earth Fleet Command Center, Admiral Sato received the latest intelligence update. Concord fleets were repositioning near human space. Observation fleets. Defensive formations. They were preparing for a possible confrontation. But they still believed they had time. Sato turned toward the tactical display showing Earth's growing fleet. Shipyards continued launching new vessels every hour. Some were crude. Some experimental. Some barely tested. But there were more of them every day. The officer beside her spoke quietly. "Admiral, if this continues, we'll double the fleet within 6 months." Sato shook her head slightly. "Not 6 months." She zoomed in on the production schedule. 3. The officer stared at the numbers. "That's impossible." Sato gave a calm, almost chilling reply. "Humanity has faced extinction before." She looked at the glowing star map. "And we learned something from it." The officer waited. Sato finished the thought. "When survival is on the line." Her voice dropped slightly. "Humans work very, very fast." Across human space, shipyards continued building. Factories continued forging armor and weapons. Scientists continued designing new technologies. And still, humanity said nothing. But the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of warships being born. For nearly 2 weeks after humanity entered strategic silence, the border systems between human space and the Galactic Concord remained quiet. Too quiet. Concord surveillance fleets had begun monitoring every known human hyperspace lane. Long-range sensors tracked shipyard activity and cargo traffic, trying to understand what the rapidly expanding human industry meant. Most Concord analysts reached the same conclusion. Humanity was panicking. A young civilization, frightened by political isolation and reacting emotionally to the death of its ambassador. Yes, they were building ships. But inexperienced species often believed numbers alone could win wars. The Concord had seen it many times before. Civilizations that expanded too quickly. Species that overestimated their strength. Empires that collapsed the moment they encountered a truly unified galactic power. The humans, most experts believed, would learn the same lesson. But there was one problem. No one in the Concord had ever actually fought humans before. And humanity had spent the last 2 weeks studying every military doctrine the Concord possessed. Inside the command center of the United Earth Fleet, Admiral Naomi Sato stood before a holographic star map displaying the outer border of human territory. A red icon blinked slowly. The Vreth Patrol Fleet. 37 ships. Officially, they were conducting routine border observation. Unofficially, they were testing humanity's reaction. Fleet Commander Elias Chen spoke from across the command table. "They've been sitting there for 12 hours. Sato nodded slightly. "They're waiting." Chen crossed his arms. "For what?" Sato's answer was simple. "For us to panic." The Vreth were an old species, tall, gray-skinned beings with elongated skulls and a reputation for rigid military discipline. Their fleets operated with perfect order. Precise formations. Predictable engagement patterns. Every ship class had a clearly defined role. Destroyers screened cruisers. Cruisers supported carriers. Carriers deployed fighter swarms. It was efficient, logical, and extremely easy to simulate. Behind Sato, An AI tactical display showed the result of the last 31 hours of human battle simulations. Outcome probabilities scrolled across the screen. Victory chances. Casualty estimates. Strategic variations. Every possible move the Vreth fleet could make had been tested. Over. And over. And over again. Commander Chen glanced at the numbers. Are we really doing this? Sato looked at him. They crossed into our border zone. Chen shrugged. Technically, they're still outside the demarcation line. Sato didn't smile. They're close enough. Across the room, another officer reported. Human fleet group arriving now. The star map updated. 16 human warships appeared near the contested border. New ships. Fresh from the Martian shipyards. Many of them hadn't even been formally named yet. Chen studied the formation. We're outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Sato nodded calmly. That's fine. The Vreth patrol fleet immediately detected the approaching human ships. Inside their flagship, Commander Talron Vec watched the tactical display with mild curiosity. 16 vessels, his sensor officer reported. Talron tilted his head slightly. That is their entire response? Yes, Commander. Talron allowed himself a small smile. Humanity was emotional after all. Sending a handful of warships to posture at the border. A symbolic display. Not a real engagement. He opened a communication channel. Transmit a warning. Moments later, the message reached the approaching human fleet. Unidentified human vessels. You are approaching a Concord monitoring zone. Alter course immediately. Inside the human flagship, Commander Elias Chen read the message. He looked at Admiral Sato. Your call. Sato didn't hesitate. Maintain course. The human fleet continued advancing. The Vreth commander frowned slightly. They are ignoring the warning. Talron considered the situation for a moment. Then he issued another message. Failure to comply will result in defensive action. The human ships did not respond. They simply kept coming. Talron finally gave the order. Prepare weapons. Across the Vreth fleet, energy cannons began charging. Shield generators powered up. Perfect formation tightened as each ship moved precisely into its designated combat position. The humans were about to learn an important lesson about galactic warfare. Then something strange appeared on the tactical display. The human ships were spreading out. Not retreating. Not advancing in formation. Just moving. Individually. Random directions. Talron frowned. What are they doing? His tactical officer hesitated. They are not maintaining formation. Talron's voice sharpened. That is obvious. The officer zoomed in on the sensor data. It appears they are improvising. Talron had never heard that word used in military doctrine. Before he could ask what it meant, the human fleet opened fire. But not in any recognizable pattern. Instead of coordinated volleys, individual ships attacked different targets simultaneously. Missile salvos launched from unexpected angles. Railgun rounds streaked across space from ships positioned far outside standard engagement ranges. One human destroyer accelerated directly through the center of the Vreth formation, firing continuously as it passed. Talron stared at the chaos unfolding on his tactical display. This is madness. His fleet struggled to respond. Vreth combat doctrine relied on precise coordination. Each ship expected predictable support from the others. But the human attacks weren't following any logical pattern. Some ships retreated suddenly. Others charged forward without warning. One vessel shut down its engines completely and drifted silently through the battlefield before reactivating and launching a surprise missile barrage. Within minutes, the Vreth formation began breaking apart. Ships moved out of position. Support vessels lost cover. Defensive screens collapsed under attacks from directions their doctrine never anticipated. Talron slammed a hand against the command console. Regroup. But it was already too late. A human cruiser fired a concentrated railgun burst that pierced the armor of a Vreth carrier. The massive vessel erupted in a silent explosion. 3 more ships followed within seconds. The Vreth fleet began retreating. Talron could hardly believe what he was seeing. They weren't being outgunned. They weren't being overwhelmed. They were being outthought. The humans weren't fighting according to any known tactical system. They were adapting constantly, changing strategies mid-battle, exploiting every moment of confusion. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, the Vreth patrol fleet had lost 12 ships. The surviving vessels retreated rapidly toward Concord territory. 16 human ships remained in the contested system. Commander Chen leaned back in his chair. Well, he glanced at Admiral Sato. That went better than expected. Sato studied the battlefield reports. Then she gave a small nod. Transmit a message. Chen raised an eyebrow. We're breaking silence. Only briefly. Chen activated the communications console. What's the message? Sato watched the stars on the tactical display. Then she spoke. Send it to every Concord fleet command. Chen waited. Sato's voice was calm. Tell them. She paused. That humanity has begun responding. The transmission shot across the stars. And across the galaxy, military analysts studying the first battle report began to realize something deeply unsettling. Humans did not fight the way other species did. They fought like a species that had been practicing war for thousands of years. News of the first border engagement spread across the galactic Concord faster than anyone expected. At first, most governments assumed the reports were exaggerated. A small human fleet defeating a larger Vreth patrol force should have been impossible. The Concord had centuries of combat experience, standardized fleet doctrines, and battle-tested command structures. Humanity had barely existed on the galactic stage. But the sensor logs told a different story. Every shot fired. Every maneuver. Every destroyed ship. Military analysts across the Concord studied the battle data in growing confusion. The human fleet had not followed any known combat doctrine. They had no visible command formation. No consistent attack pattern. Some ships behaved like interceptors, rushing forward aggressively. Others stayed far behind the engagement zone, launching missiles from extreme range. One vessel even shut down its engines mid-battle, drifting silently until it reactivated at the perfect moment to strike. To most Concord strategists, the battle looked like chaos. To a few older commanders, it looked like something else. Inside the Strategic Analysis Hall on Orion Gate 9, dozens of military experts watched the battle recording again. A tactical officer paused the holographic display. This maneuver here, he said, pointing at a human cruiser cutting sharply across the battlefield. That violates every established fleet coordination rule. Another officer shook his head. Not just that. He zoomed in on the human ships. Look at their spacing. The display highlighted the distances between the vessels. They aren't maintaining defensive coverage for each other. That means their fleet should collapse under concentrated fire. But it hadn't. Instead, the humans had broken the Vreth formation apart. Slowly, methodically, until the larger fleet no longer had the coordination required to fight effectively. The analysts watched the final moments of the battle again. 12 destroyed Vreth ships. 16 human vessels still operational. The room fell quiet. Finally, one of the oldest strategists in the Concord spoke. A gray-skinned Dravani war advisor who had commanded fleets for nearly 2 centuries. They are not fighting as a fleet. The others looked at him. What do you mean? The Dravani advisor leaned forward slightly. Most species organize their fleets like machines. He gestured toward the holographic battle display. Each ship performs a specific function within a larger structure. Destroyers screen. Cruisers engage. Carriers deploy fighters. It is efficient. But it is also rigid. He pointed toward the human ships again. They are not operating like machines. The room waited. They are operating like individual predators. A ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the analysts. The advisor continued. Each human captain is making independent tactical decisions in real time. Changing strategy every few seconds. Attacking where opportunity appears. Another officer frowned. That sounds reckless. The Dravani strategist nodded slowly. It is. He paused. But it is also extremely difficult to predict. Across the hall, a young intelligence officer spoke up. We have also discovered something unusual in their fleet communications. The display shifted to show data transmissions between human ships during the battle. The signal traffic was enormous. Thousands of short messages sent every second. But none of them resembled standard military commands. Instead, they looked like rapid tactical suggestions. Ideas, warnings, opportunities. The officer explained. They are not waiting for centralized orders. They are sharing information constantly and reacting instantly. The Dravani strategist nodded again. Like a pack of hunters. Silence spread across the room. The analysts began to understand the problem. If human fleets didn't rely on rigid command structures, then traditional strategies wouldn't work against them. Predictive models would fail. Battle formations would break down. And every engagement would become unpredictable. Meanwhile, inside the United Earth Fleet Command Center, Admiral Naomi Sato was reviewing reports from the border victory. Commander Elias Chen approached her with a small smile. The Concorde seems confused. Sato glanced at the incoming intelligence. They should be. Chen leaned against the command table. I still don't understand something. Sato looked up. What? Why didn't we destroy the entire patrol fleet? Chen pointed to the battle report. We had the advantage once their formation collapsed. Sato turned back to the star map. Because this battle wasn't about destroying ships. Chen raised an eyebrow. Then what was it about? Sato zoomed out the display. The border system shrank into a much larger galactic map. It was about sending a message. She highlighted the location of the battle. Right now, every military intelligence division in the Concorde is studying what happened here. Chen nodded slowly. They're trying to understand our tactics. Sato gave a faint smile. Exactly. Chen suddenly realized something. You let them see everything. Sato folded her arms. We wanted them to. Chen stared at the star map. Why? Sato answered calmly. Because what they saw. She tapped the display showing the human fleet's chaotic maneuvers. Was the second most logical strategy we could use. Chen blinked. Second. Sato's expression remained perfectly neutral. The most logical one would have been much harder to predict. Chen stared at her for a moment. Then he slowly began to grin. Across the galaxy, military commanders were reviewing the battle footage again and again, trying to understand the strange human tactics, trying to build counter-strategies, trying to restore their confidence in Concorde military superiority. But none of them realized something important. The humans had only shown them one version of how they fought, and humanity had thousands more. 3 weeks after the first border engagement, the political atmosphere inside the Galactic Concorde had changed. Before the battle, humanity had been viewed as a minor irritation, a young species with unusual ambition but limited influence. Now the conversation was very different. Human fleets were expanding rapidly. Border patrols were becoming cautious. And Concorde military analysts were still struggling to understand the strange, unpredictable tactics used by the United Earth Fleet. But while military strategists argued about battle doctrine, another crisis was quietly unfolding inside the diplomatic halls of Orion Gate 9. Because one species in the Concorde knew something the others didn't. The Lyra Coalition. Their representative, the same silver-feathered diplomat who had defended humanity during the council meeting, had spent the last 3 weeks investigating the execution of Ambassador Elena Voss. At first, her goal had been simple. She believed Ambassador Lethrix of the Varn Dominion had acted alone. A rogue diplomat making a terrible decision in a moment of political arrogance. But the deeper she searched into the station's internal records, the more disturbing the truth became. Late one night, inside a secure analysis chamber deep within Orion Gate 9, the Lyran diplomat studied a series of encrypted council communications. Beside her stood a nervous Concorde data archivist. You shouldn't be accessing those files, the archivist whispered. They're restricted to senior council authorities. The Lyran tilted her head slightly. And yet they exist. Her bright eyes focused on the data screen. which means they can be examined. The archivist shifted uncomfortably. If Ambassador Lethrix learns we opened those records. He won't. She continued scanning the files. A timeline began forming. Private council discussions. Encrypted voting sessions. Strategic briefings that had never been shared with the full assembly. Then she found the file that changed everything. A classified meeting held 4 days before Ambassador Voss arrived at Orion Gate 9. Participants: Ambassador Lethrix, Varn Dominion, High Strategist Koval, Dravani Hegemony, Director Shalen, Karathi Collective. The Lyran Diplomat opened the recording. The holographic playback activated. 3 alien figures appeared around a private council table. Lethrix spoke first. Human expansion cannot continue unchecked. Koval nodded slowly. Their colonization rate exceeds any known civilization in the last millennium. Director Shalen's insectoid form clicked softly. Our projections show they will control 22 systems within the next decade. Lethrix leaned forward. And if they join the Concord? He paused. They gain voting power. Silence followed. Then Koval spoke quietly. The Concord cannot maintain balance with an unpredictable species gaining influence. Shalen's voice crackled through the translator. Recommendation: prevent membership. Lethrix's expression hardened. That alone will not be sufficient. He activated a star map showing human territory. Their population growth is accelerating. Even without membership, they will eventually rival existing powers. Koval's voice dropped slightly. What solution do you propose? Lethrix did not hesitate. Remove their leadership. The Lyran Diplomat froze as the recording continued. Shalen tilted its head. You mean assassination? Lethrix nodded. Ambassador Elena Voss represents the primary architect of human diplomatic expansion. If she dies during the council proceedings. He paused. Humanity will retreat into internal conflict. Koval considered the idea. A destabilized civilization would halt their expansion. Shalen's insectoid mandibles clicked softly. Collateral diplomatic consequences? Lethrix gave a thin smile. Humanity is not a Concord member. Technically, they have no legal protection. The Lyran Diplomat slowly stepped back from the projection. The recording continued playing. The conspirators discussed logistics. Security overrides. Turret control access. The exact moment during the council session when the assassination would occur. It had all been planned. Days before Ambassador Voss even arrived. The archivist stared at the playback in horror. They planned it. The Lyran Diplomat shut off the recording. Yes. Her feathers ruffled with anger. This was never about rejecting humanity's membership. She looked at the frozen holographic image of Lethrix. It was about eliminating them before they became powerful. The archivist whispered nervously. You have to report this. The Lyran Diplomat shook her head. To who? Half the council leadership is involved. The archivist looked pale. What will you do? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she accessed another system terminal and began copying the encrypted files. Meeting recordings. Security override logs. Private communications between the conspirators. Every piece of evidence. The archivist's voice trembled. If this becomes public, the entire Concord could collapse. The Lyran Diplomat finally turned toward him. Her bright eyes were steady. Good. Minutes later, a small diplomatic courier ship quietly departed from a private docking ring on Orion Gate 9. Its destination was not another Concord world. It was Earth. Inside the ship's communication chamber, the Lyran Diplomat recorded a message. Her voice carried a mix of regret and urgency. Human leaders of Earth. She paused. I believe your species deserves the truth. The data files began uploading. Encrypted council recordings. Proof of the conspiracy. Evidence that the execution of Ambassador Elena Voss had not been an accident. Or a rogue decision. It had been a deliberate political assassination. approved by several of the most powerful members of the Galactic Concord. The Lyran diplomat finished the message quietly. I do not know how your species will respond to this information. She hesitated. But I suspect. Her silver feathers shifted slightly. That the galaxy is about to learn something important about humanity. The transmission beam shot across the stars toward Earth, carrying the truth. And when that truth arrived, everything in the galaxy would change. The encrypted transmission from Orion Gate 9 arrived on Earth 17 hours later. It reached the United Earth Strategic Command at exactly 3:14 Greenwich Mean Time. Within minutes, the highest levels of human government were awake. Admirals, intelligence directors, political leaders. All of them gathered inside a secure chamber beneath the Pacific Ocean, the central command complex known simply as Horizon. A large holographic display filled the room. The image of the Lyran diplomat appeared. Her silver feathers shimmered softly under the recording lights. The room remained silent as her message played. Human leaders of Earth, I believe your species deserves the truth. The files began unfolding across the display. Private Concord recordings. Security override codes. The meeting between Ambassador Lethrix, High Strategist Koval, and Director Shalen. Every word of the assassination plan. Every detail of how Ambassador Elena Voss had been deliberately executed during the council session. When the recording ended, the room remained silent. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Admiral Naomi Sato exhaled slowly. So. Her voice was calm. They confirmed it. Across the table, Director Marcus Hale of Earth Intelligence nodded grimly. We suspected political manipulation. He gestured toward the projection. But this is something else entirely. A younger officer clenched his fists. They murdered our ambassador. Hale looked at him carefully. Yes. But more importantly, he tapped the star map appearing on the display. They tried to eliminate humanity before we became strong enough to matter. The room filled with quiet anger. But there was no shouting. No panic. Human leadership had spent centuries learning how to respond to threats calmly. Finally, the president of the United Earth Coalition spoke. What are our options? A strategic display appeared. 3 possible responses. Option 1. War. Launch full military retaliation against the conspirator species. Human fleets were already expanding. Within months they could push into several Concord territories. But the projections were brutal. Billions of deaths across multiple systems. A galactic conflict lasting decades. Option 2. Isolation. Withdraw completely from Concord space. Focus on expanding human territory beyond their reach. Ignore the political structures of the galaxy entirely. Safe. But it would allow the conspirators to remain in power. And the truth about Ambassador Voss would never reach the wider galaxy. Option 3. Exposure. Reveal the conspiracy. Publicly. Directly to the full Galactic Concord. Risking political chaos. Possibly even civil war inside the Council. The President studied the options. Then he looked at Admiral Sato. What would Elena Voss have done? The room grew quiet again. Sato thought for a moment. Then she answered. She would have walked back into that council chamber. Several officers looked surprised. Even after they killed her? Sato nodded. Yes. She looked at the holographic star map. Elena believed something very specific about the galaxy. The president leaned forward slightly. What? Sato met his gaze. That most civilizations aren't evil. They're just afraid. The display shifted. The map zoomed toward Orion Gate 9. That council chamber is filled with hundreds of species. Most of them had no idea what their leaders planned. Sato folded her arms. If we start a war, we prove every fear they already have about humanity. The president slowly nodded. So we show them the truth instead. Sato allowed a small smile. Exactly. 2 days later, something unprecedented happened. A single human diplomatic ship appeared near Orion Gate 9. No fleet. No escort vessels. Just one ship. The UEC Resolute. Inside the Concorde's Central Council chamber, the representatives of dozens of species were already arguing when the announcement arrived. A human vessel has entered the system. The chamber erupted with confused murmurs. They're returning. After the border battle. Are they insane? Then the second announcement came. The human vessel has requested permission to address the full council. Ambassador Lethrix sat perfectly still. His cold eyes narrowed slightly. They cannot possibly think diplomacy will protect them now. Across the chamber, the Lyran diplomat remained silent. Her feathers barely moved. Moments later, the doors of the council chamber opened. A single human walked inside. Not a military officer. Not an admiral. A diplomat. A woman wearing the dark blue uniform of the United Earth Coalition. She stepped calmly to the center of the chamber. Hundreds of alien eyes focused on her. The council moderator spoke carefully. Identify yourself. The human woman answered clearly. My name is Ambassador Daniel Reyes. Several council members exchanged confused glances. You replaced Elena Voss? Reyes nodded once. Yes. Ambassador Lethrix leaned forward slightly. And you have come here alone? Reyes met his gaze. Yes. The chamber fell silent. Lethrix gave a thin smile. You are either very brave. He tilted his head slightly. Or very foolish. Reyes didn't react. Instead, she activated the small data device in her hand. A holographic projection appeared above the center of the chamber. The private meeting recording. Lethrix. Koval. Shalen. Planning the assassination of Ambassador Elena Voss. The room exploded with shocked voices. Dozens of council members stood up at once. What is this? Is this authentic? Those are restricted recordings. Lethrix's expression froze. The projection continued playing. Every detail of the conspiracy exposed. Every voice clearly recorded. When the recording ended, the council chamber fell into stunned silence. Ambassador Reyes spoke calmly. My predecessor came here in good faith. She believed the Concorde represented the best ideals of galactic cooperation. Reyes looked around the chamber. But some of your leaders believed something else. Her eyes briefly settled on Lethrix. They believed humanity should be eliminated before we became inconvenient. The silence deepened. Then Reyes folded her hands behind her back. Earth is not here to declare war. The council members looked up again. We are here to offer a choice. The chamber waited. Reyes continued. You can allow those responsible for this conspiracy to remain in power. In which case humanity will defend itself accordingly. She paused. Or. Her voice remained steady. You can prove that the Galactic Concorde actually stands for justice. No threats. No anger. Just a simple challenge. The entire galaxy was about to decide what kind of civilization it wanted to be. For several seconds after Ambassador Daniel Reyes finished speaking, the Galactic Concorde Council chamber remained completely silent. Hundreds of representatives sat frozen. The holographic recording still hovered above the chamber floor. The voices of Lethrix, Koval, and Shalen echoing faintly in the air. Proof. Undeniable proof. For centuries, the Galactic Concorde had presented itself as the ultimate symbol of cooperation and law. Now the entire institution stood exposed. A council member from the Valari Trade Union was the first to speak. This cannot be ignored. Another delegate rose. The evidence is clear. Across the chamber, the massive armored representative of the Tarkesh Dominion slammed one heavy fist against the table. This is treachery against the Concorde itself. Voices erupted across the room. Accusations. Anger. Shock. The political unity of the Concorde began fracturing in real time. But one figure remained very still. Ambassador Lethrix. The Varn diplomat slowly stood. His expression had returned to its usual cold calm. You have presented a convincing fabrication. A wave of disbelief spread through the chamber. Lethrix continued smoothly. These recordings are obviously altered. He gestured toward Ambassador Reyes. A desperate attempt by humanity to justify their recent military aggression. Several representatives looked uncertain. Lethrix pressed forward. The humans have already attacked Concord patrol fleets. They are expanding militarily. His voice grew sharper. And now they attempt to destabilize the Council by accusing its leadership of murder. For a moment the chamber hesitated. Politics was rarely simple, even with evidence. Then the Lyran diplomat slowly rose from her seat, silver feathers shimmering beneath the chamber lights. Her voice was calm. I personally retrieved those files from the Concord Central Archive. The room turned toward her. They are authentic. Lethrix's eyes narrowed. You are accusing a senior council representative of conspiracy. The Lyran tilted her head slightly. No. Her gaze swept across the chamber. I am accusing 3. She activated another projection. Security logs. Authorization codes. Digital signatures. Each one verified by the Concord's own systems. The evidence was overwhelming. The chamber erupted again. This time louder. Representatives began shouting for immediate action. Detain them. Remove them from the council. Launch a full investigation. Lethrix realized the situation was collapsing. For the first time, his calm expression cracked slightly. You are making a mistake. He looked around the chamber. The humans are dangerous. They expand too quickly. They refuse to follow galactic order. He pointed toward Ambassador Reyes. If you allow their species to rise unchecked. A deep voice interrupted him. Enough. The speaker was the Dravani High Strategist, Koval himself. The massive reptilian figure slowly stood. For a moment, the chamber quieted. Koval looked at the recording still hovering above the floor. Then at the hundreds of representatives watching him. Finally, his gaze settled on Ambassador Reyes. You came here alone. Reyes nodded. Yes. Koval studied her carefully. You knew you might not leave this chamber alive. Yes. The strategist leaned forward slightly. And yet you still chose diplomacy. Reyes answered simply. Because war is easy. Trust is harder. The chamber grew very still. Koval slowly turned toward Lethrix. Then toward the rest of the council. For 2 centuries the Dravani had been one of the Concord's strongest military powers. What Koval said next would matter. Finally he spoke. The recordings are real. A shockwave of whispers spread across the room. Koval continued calmly. The plan was proposed. His reptilian eyes hardened slightly. And I agreed to it. Gasps echoed across the chamber. But Koval raised one clawed hand. I believed humanity would become a destabilizing force. He looked again at Ambassador Reyes. But I was wrong. Silence. Koval lowered his head slightly. In Dravani culture, a warrior accepts responsibility for his actions. Security drones began moving toward the conspirators. Lethrix stared in disbelief. You would betray your own plan? Koval answered quietly. No. I am correcting it. The drones surrounded Lethrix and Director Shalen. Across the chamber, representatives slowly began voting. Emergency Council procedures activated. Within minutes, the results appeared on the central display. Vote result. Removal of Lethrix, Koval, and Shalen from Concord leadership. Criminal Tribunal authorization. Vote outcome. Approved. 94%. The decision sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the Concord had turned against its own leadership. Ambassador Reyes stood quietly as the chamber slowly regained order. Then the council moderator addressed her. Human representative. He paused carefully. Humanity's application for Concord membership was previously rejected. The chamber waited. But after today's events, he activated the council voting interface again. A new proposal appeared. Emergency vote. Admission of the United Earth Coalition. The votes began appearing across the chamber. one by one. Green lights filling the display. When the final vote locked in, the chamber erupted with quiet astonishment. Approved, 89%. Humanity had just become a full member of the Galactic Concord. Without firing a single shot. Ambassador Reyes allowed herself a small breath. Then the Lyran diplomat approached her. "You could have started a war." Reyes nodded. "Yes." The Lyran tilted her head slightly. "Why didn't you?" Reyes looked around the massive chamber filled with alien civilizations. Because she knew something Ambassador Elena Voss had believed until the very end. Because humanity isn't here to conquer the galaxy. She smiled slightly. "We're here to join it." Far away, on Earth, the news spread across billions of screens. Humanity had walked into the heart of the galaxy's most powerful government, exposed a conspiracy, forced justice, and earned their place among the stars. Not through fear, not through war, but through courage. And the galaxy would spend the next 1,000 years discovering something the conspirators had never understood. Humans didn't become powerful because they were ruthless. They became powerful because even when they had every reason to fight, they still tried to do the right thing. And that, more than anything else in the universe, was what made humanity dangerous. Rocket,